Welcome, everyone. And thanks to our state auditor, I want to thank first Adam Edelen for being here today. I also want to recognize our council members, Vice Mayor Linda Gordon, Chris Ford, who's a member of the Board of Health, Bill Farmer, Harry Clark, and Edelen for taking time to join us today as well. I especially want to thank Auditor Edelen for the quick response to my request for this audit. While I, as mayor, do not appoint the HealthFirst board, and I have no direct oversight over this board, I am the mayor, and this is our city. It's my job to insist on doing what's best for our city. We want good health services. They are essential. Making this new clinic happen is important to all of us, especially citizens who cannot afford or have no access to basic health care. And we expect those who are handling public funds in our city to follow the highest standards. The findings of this audit regrettably suggest that at a minimum, in the hiring of a project management firm, HealthFirst was playing too close to the foul line. I'm sure our auditors will confirm that there are a lot of complex and challenging and even confusing issues that surround this clinic and the federal grant that will provide most of its funding. This project has some problems, and we need to work together with the local and federal officials to sort them out. Despite the confusion and complexity, a couple of points are clear to all of us. First, our community needs this primary care clinic, and we must do all we can to work with federal officials to move the project forward. My plan is to contact the federal agency that provided the grant, the Health Resources and Services Administration, and work with them to address the serious issues this audit brings to light. And I would strongly encourage the HealthFirst board to do the same. I believe the findings of this audit, even though it has uncovered some serious problems, will, in the end, help us move the new primary care clinic forward. I urge the HealthFirst board to act immediately to address the issues identified in the audit. And second, these are public funds, and the public has every right to hold HealthFirst accountable for every dollar. Accountability and transparency are essential. And that's why I encourage the HealthFirst board to meet the standards of the state's open records and open meetings laws. Now it's time for me to turn this over to the experts. Our state auditor, Adam Edelen, who with his staff has done a remarkable job under a very challenging time frame to complete this audit. Auditor.
Thank you. Appreciate it very much, Mayor. Thank you very much, and welcome to all of you. It is good to be here in Lexington, my home, and I certainly appreciate the Mayor's leadership in having the courage to ask for this audit. You know, sometimes it takes a lot of courage to ask difficult questions, particularly when they involve something as important as providing base-level health care to our most vulnerable. And it is with that serious attitude that the professional career staff in my office, led by Brian Likens, provided a thorough evaluation of the questions that have been raised in relation to the HealthFirst board and the administration of a nearly $12 million project to build a much-needed health clinic in this community. First, let me say that the $11.7 million federal grant provides a unique opportunity for Lexington to expand healthcare services in this community to those who are underserved and who deserve, just like the rest of us, access to quality health care. The HealthFirst employees and board are charged with ensuring the grant is administered in a manner to ensure compliance with federal requirements that will allow the maximum amount of funds to be used to provide a healthcare facility for our most vulnerable here in Lexington, Kentucky. This examination should serve as a tool for the HealthFirst board to get their house in order, to make sure that we can provide an excellent level of care and service and complete this important project. Now, let me say this about the HealthFirst Board. I believe it is comprised of individuals who are trying to do a good job for this community. But I want to point out that the slapdash manner in which this effort was pursued did not properly serve this community. So it is my hope that, again, this report will be held as a tool and used as a tool by the HealthFirst Board and other community leaders to right the ship and continue upon with this incredibly important role they have in this community. Due to the need for all these federal grants to complete this project, we highlight in our report issues that have occurred that may potentially cause HRSA, the federal oversight agency, to question whether certain costs were unallowable. This could decrease the amount of federal funds available to complete this project. Folks, that's not something any of us want, but I think the moral of this story is that you have to follow the process and the rules, no matter how inconvenient or timely that might be. We have 4 findings that involve pre-selection of a project manager, that project manager having a conflict of interest, a lease issue involving the exclusive use of the health care parking lot, and the financial viability of HealthFirst. It's important to note that we are referring these issues to HRSA for their additional consideration to determine whether additional action is necessary. The first finding is that a candidate for project manager appears to have been pre-selected prior to the solicitation process for the contracted position. HealthFirst did not follow a thorough and transparent procurement procedure in the selection of the project manager. Instead, the landlord was pre-selected by HealthFirst, and then a procurement process was developed that would ensure the results of the process would support the pre-selected choice. The building committee voted to engage HealthFirst landlord as project manager before any qualifications for the position were decided or a search for other candidates was initiated. The criteria developed for scoring the candidate was highly favorable to the selection of the already identified landlord as project manager. The HealthFirst executive director, and not the larger building committee, scored the candidate's resumes himself, and no candidate interviews were conducted before the landlord was selected as the project manager. As you can see, these are troubling. And while we don't make a judgment on the performance of that said project manager, clearly the process that was used to select him was one that was deeply flawed and cannot be permitted to be repeated. Finding 2 is that the project manager has a conflict of interest functioning as both HealthFirst landlord and the project manager. I think there's a good reason that Scripture tells us that we can't serve 2 masters. The project manager represents HealthFirst interest and oversees the planning, design, and construction of a new healthcare center. That project manager has a conflict of interest due to his part ownership in the property of HealthFirst is leasing and developing for the new health center. And while his interest is not a controlling interest, I would point out that by the reasonable person standard, anyone who has 10% of a multi-million-dollar project has a significant interest in how that project is developed. It is also improbable, if conflicts do arise, that an individual could fully disregard his responsibility to his business associate and jeopardize future business opportunities and potential earnings with that person. It is clear that an individual cannot completely remove themselves from any personal consideration when making decisions as project manager when they have so much personal wealth tied up into the project. It is for this reason that codes of conduct and ethics standards for employees, officials, and board members serving in the public sector prevent such conflicts of interest. It is generally recognized that the duality of serving 2 conflicting interests is not logically possible and therefore should and ought to be prohibited. Mr. Mims was not covered by the ethics rules of this organization because he served as a project manager, that is a vendor. And we think that the federal authorities should help us clear up any confusion as to whether this implicitly creates a conflict of interest, and the state auditor believes that it does. Finding 3 is that the amended lease draft does not require exclusive parking for HealthFirst. Folks, if public resources are spent to a public good, the public ought to own the benefits of that investment. And while I should point out that the lease is just a draft, it is my hope that the HealthFirst Board will take seriously my finding that those public resources need to be protected. The original and amended lease agreements have conflicting parking terms that would negatively affect HealthFirst compliance with HRSA requirements. The unsigned amended lease currently does not provide HealthFirst with exclusive rights to all parking lot space, whose construction may be paid for by the federal grant. By not having the exclusive control, the cost associated with a parking lot could be considered unallowable cost for the grant. And the fourth and final finding is not just about the operation of HealthFirst, but the environment in which HealthFirst finds itself in. HealthFirst financial stability is threatened by untimely Medicaid payments and less than budgeted patient revenue. HealthFirst financial stability is ultimately tied to meaningful and timely Medicaid payments and receiving less than budgeted patient revenue with only approximately 30 days of cash on hand as of the end of 2012. However, June 1st, 2013, cash flow projections indicate that HealthFirst would have less than 30 days of cash remaining through the balance of 2013. This is not something that is unique to HealthFirst. There are provider groups all around Kentucky, both public and private, that are having enormous difficulty managing the new managed care system we have for our Medicaid program. But dealing with those realities and setting a clear and frankly more honest course is a way to deal with the difficulties that surround the organization. HealthFirst budgeted for an aggressive net patient revenue increase of 38% in 2013, anticipating its expansion to the Regency Road and 2 school clinics. However, these budget projections have to be revised downward to 9% to reflect a more conservative anticipated net patient revenue increase for 2012. HealthFirst has a Medicaid accounts receivable of $1.1 million. Now keep in mind, I'm the first auditor to get aggressively into Medicaid. We have set up a unit to exclusively track the performance of our managed care system in Kentucky. And when I talk about the accounts receivable being $1.1 million, that's not necessarily the fault of HealthFirst. It's the fault of a bureaucratic system that has created a lot of confusion at the state level with managed care organizations, private companies, now running our very public Medicaid system. But this is something that not only confronts HealthFirst, but confronts many Medicaid providers all over the state. Cash remaining at the end of 2013 is projected to be $131,478, whereas $925,246 in cash was available at December 31st, 2013. Folks, it's clear that this organization, from a budgetary impact, cannot continue to go on as it has been going on, and it's certainly the role of all policymakers here in Lexington and those indeed at the state level who care about having a safety net in place for our most vulnerable, that to take added measures to make sure that that safety net is viable and capable of support here in Kentucky's second largest city. The board has an important role, and again I want to say that I believe that the board is comprised of mainly good people trying to do good work. But boards have an important fiduciary and moral obligation to the people they serve. They have an outcome that they have to affect, a mission that is theirs. In this case, it was the mission of making sure our most vulnerable have the care that they need, that a safety net's in place. But there's also a second and just as important obligation that any board has, and that is to be a good steward of the public resources. Oftentimes, it's easy to be frivolous with other people's money. But in this case, the monies that go through any public system, particularly HealthFirst, belong to the public. And they have to be treated with care, concern, and every step has got to be taken to make sure that those public resources, our dollars, are spent honestly, efficiently, and wisely. It is my hope that this document, that this report, that is literally the product of hundreds of hours of work performed by my excellent and capable staff, it's my hope that this report becomes a galvanizing document for this community in making sure that we all come together and understand that we have a shared obligation to make sure that there is at least a standard level of care available to our most vulnerable. And I look forward to working with the mayor to make sure that we can that we can get the result that we all want. So with that, we're happy to answer any questions from the media. Wow, left you speechless.
You said in the report it said that you could jeopardize the amount of money, federal money you may get. Is this a possibility of jeopardizing the entire project?
Well, that's our concern, and I think that's why when you listen to the mayor's remarks to begin this event, he is taking, I think, a forward lean approach to going to Washington, making sure that we're doing all that we can to make sure we do here in this community get that health center that we so desperately need. And I think the other underlying current of the mayor's leadership here, and indeed the report that we provided, is that making sure this project works needs to be everybody's obligation, not just the HealthFirst board. Certainly the health department has a role. All of those of us in this community who care a lot about making sure that that level of quality care is available for our most vulnerable have a role. I think it's safe to say this isn't just somebody else's problem.
Mayor, will you be asking for a new project manager? How do you move forward with that?
What I've encouraged is the HealthFirst board to address the significant issues that the audit has presented. And that would certainly include a very quick examination of any decisions that have been made in the past. For example, the selection process of the project manager.
The final recommendation about the community coming together to ensure full and adequate operation of the clinic, that sounded like a suggestion that some more public revenue might need to be put in towards this project. Is that the suggestion?
Well, I think before we can ever ask the public to delve more deeply into their pockets or wallets, we've got to make sure that those resources that are being invested now are being spent wisely, adequately, efficiently, and above all, honestly. And I think this report goes a long way towards saying, look, there are problems with the process. We need to make sure that which is already invested isn't jeopardized in the effort to build this health clinic that I think this community desperately needs.
You know, this is one of the few places in the city where today federal funds are still being received by the city. Cities across the country have struggled with declining federal funds. This is a place where we have received them. So doing it right, doing it properly, engaging the project properly is significant because our city's reputation is at stake.